My name is Anaya Snile, and I'm here to talk about Satanism, performance art, and philosophy. So when I was a teenager, I lived in the suburbs of Chicago. I actually moved around a decent amount as a young person. I was actually born in Japan. My dad is in the military. And so I was born in Okinawa, lived there for, I think, just under 2 years. Then moved to Virginia, then to Michigan. Then I think I was around 9 or 10, moved to the suburbs of Chicago, which was probably the worst decision that my parents ever made. Something about transplanting us from Michigan, where we had lots of roots and connections, to this northern suburb was just a really terrible choice, although obviously they didn't know it at the time. It was quite sterile. The people were not welcoming. I think there was a bit of a culture shock, which sounds strange to say given that it's still in the Midwest United States. But these different pockets of culture can be so different, even just across a small distance, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you can go to a different area code and it's completely different there, especially in Detroit. Are your parents Japanese, or were they just working there at the time?
No, my dad is a Marine, so my parents are both American. They're both from the Detroit area. My mom is from Detroit proper. And so my dad was in the military. He was a Marine. He got deployed over there. And there's a military base in Okinawa, and so I was born there. My parents, I think, were only together like a year or so. And it was kind of like we either gotta, shit or get off the pot, I guess, because I'm going across to the other side of the world. So they got married, moved to Japan, and I was born there.
Were they Catholic, your parents?
So no, my dad, I would probably describe my dad as sort of a garden variety atheist. I think he doesn't really concern himself too much with those things. Now, my mom was raised Catholic. She's the youngest of 9. And so I have a huge family on that side. I don't necessarily think that she doesn't really practice like that. And certainly we were not a religious household growing up. But I almost feel like she's a sort of like cultural Catholic, especially since, she, moved back to the area. So she doesn't live far from me now. And, she knows a lot of Catholic people. Her family is still mostly Catholic.
When you reached out to me in your email, one of the things you wanted to talk about so much was, you said your writing, your performances, as well as being part of a satanic cult of 10 people, right?
Yeah, approximately. I think, the numbers fluctuated a bit, but yeah, so I'm no longer part of any sort of organized group, but from the years approximately 2017 to 2019, I founded and led a small satanic coven in the Metro Detroit area. And my reasoning for that was that, even though it's interesting because it's like I said, I wasn't raised religious at all. So you'd think that I would have been raised like really religious, and this was like my way of sort of like expressing a frustration with that. But that's not true at all. I wasn't raised religious at all. But starting in high school, I just started to become interested in concepts that I think would eventually lead me to be more interested in Satanism as a philosophy or spiritual practice. I remember being quite young, actually, and starting to have a lot of the sort of questions about morality and also just like the nature of existence that I actually think a lot of children have. I do think we actually really underestimate what children are intellectually capable of.
Oh, 100%.
And the child doesn't need to be particularly precocious, I think, to start wondering things like, well, even if they're like sort of religious, but not really, if they're like, well, what if there is no God? Well, then where does good and bad come from? Is there such a thing as good and bad? Is that tied to reality at all? What if what I'm experiencing isn't real on some level? And I remember, this is in the very nascent days of the internet, somehow finding my way onto probably what was like a very early form of Wikipedia and discovering nihilism, which of course is dealing with a lot of those topics. And so I remember I saved...
Matters, and it has a bit of a dirty name, but there's two sides to nihilism.
Right, yeah. So I think, and I definitely think that the way that nihilism is broadly understood by people is somewhat inaccurate. So I think it's not that nothing matters. It's that because there is no ultimate either being or ultimate reality, which is giving us dictating to us, this is good, this is bad, sort of fundamental moral rules. Those things have to come from somewhere. Either we make them or we understand that they are in flux. There's a bunch of different ways that you can sort of cash that out. And so it doesn't necessarily need to be this very pessimistic, misanthropic sort of project. I definitely think you can go more positively, humanistic or otherwise with it.
Yeah, I agree. Gives you complete freedom to choose your own meaning. We're humans, we're complex enough where we can decide the meaning that is the best for everybody, including ourselves, rather than a meaning that perhaps maybe an organized religion might set for everybody, which does not fit everybody, because people come from all different cloths. What do you feel like you're missing in life and you're hoping to build and, achieve and feel from having a small community?
So there's a couple different reasons. I think definitely searching for people who were interested in Satanism. Also because I was not satisfied with the kinds of Satanism that were more popular, I guess you could say. Satanism has never been popular, but among the people who are interested in it, the kinds that were available at the time were just not satisfying to me. So on one hand, you had the mostly defunct Church of Satan, which is a form of LaVeyan Satanism. They have a sort of Randian objectivism to them. There's a lot of values that are wrapped up in that just didn't really sit right with me. And then also at the time, especially 2016, 2017, the Satanic Temple was very popular. And that didn't appeal to me for several different reasons. I personally just wasn't interested in all of the sort of like political spectacle. I felt that their political alignment was just not something that interested me, to be honest. I was looking for something that was a little bit more, I don't know, I guess you could say on the sort of like metaphysical, spiritual, occult side, I think, would be the more accurate way to put it. Especially at the time, they were pretty strictly a political organization that was using the image of Satan to get certain things done, shock and awe, put people off, whatever. And that wasn't really an interest of mine. So for me, I wanted to do rituals. I wanted to, light shit on fire and chant and do all that fun stuff. I definitely was feeling like I wanted to do something that was very boundary pushing and almost scary. I wanted to do fucking magic, man. I wanted to do something crazy like that.
Like risque things that pull people together in such a special way that all seem to land under this umbrella of the occult. There's got to be something there.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I definitely think breaking down boundaries, doing things that, we use the word edgy in a pejorative way a lot of the time, but I think, meeting up on the edge and seeing, is that edge really there? Can it be permeated? Can it be pushed back, pulled forward? I definitely think going to the edge and examining that through the art of shock is definitely it's a legitimate method of investigating what the world is. I think about when I was really young. This had to be in the year 1999. I was left unattended in front of a TV playing VH1. And on that TV was Marilyn Manson's music video for The Dope Show. You might remember in that music video, he's got the like breast forms on, and he's like painted sort of this like light blue color.
By far the most shocking thing that would pop up on the TV at the time, yeah.
Right, yeah. And I saw that, and he looked beautiful and terrifying and masculine and feminine. And it was so compelling to me as a child, the unity of these different adjacent concepts. And it always stuck with me. And the shock of it, I think, really opened me up to different aesthetic possibilities. And so I think since I saw that, I've always been trying to recreate that feeling, that openness that I got from witnessing something like that.
I don't know how far you tried to branch out this community.
So we actually did. So even in the beginning, when there were just a couple of us, we would do like either small shows that were in people's houses, or maybe like really small artistic venues. Like there was a punk venue that is in downtown Detroit. And then there was also a DIY punk venue in Ann Arbor where we actually did our first show, where we would perform these rituals that we wrote. And you'd be surprised how many people would show up to that kind of thing. You could get several dozen people to show up to this DIY satanic ritual. People are interested in seeing that kind of thing a lot of the time. So, and I definitely think overall there was sort of a desire to go larger. We eventually did perform at larger venues. And, we would have like actual established musicians like open up for us. We'd have like, metal bands, harsh noise artists, that kind of thing. We'd have other performers there with us. We'd make flyers and put them up around town. It was a whole sort of campaign that we had. It was not just like, I'm going to stop by and go to a show. It was like you would enter into the space and you would distinctly feel that there was something more going on.
It's more than one-dimensional.
Yeah. So, people would come, and I think they would eventually, once they learned more of like, oh, this isn't just like a stage performance. This isn't like a sideshow performance, or it's not just meant to be aesthetic. There's actually something like spiritual going on here. I think. Yeah,
there's something sincere to it.
Yes, there's a sincerity. People were like, oh, this is sincere. Like they're not just, it's not like the metal bands who use the upside down pentagram or whatever. They're actually being serious about these things. And I think that was compelling to a lot of people as well.
So could you describe one of the rituals that you would perform at one of these events?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was one in particular where this was at like a private event in Detroit, and you needed like a password to get in and that kind of stuff. So we would have one member go up, and then they would do like an invocation, sort of setting the scene, invoking the sort of concepts, names of Satan. Our rituals were they were amalgamations of different rituals that we had read, ones that were out there, established ones, and then bringing in elements of that we sort of created. So the one person would go up and they would do invoking the names of Satan, sort of do a little speech. Meanwhile, there is probably ambient noise music playing in the background. Then we would create the altar, which ours was a little bit different. We didn't just have a table with some stuff on it. We created a human altar. So we'd have one of our people get on the ground, and then we would adorn them with different sacred objects, have them hold a sacred object. They were usually nude for this. Sometimes we would pour wax or wine or something over them. And this was sort of their body becoming this opening through which meaning could move back and forth.
Oh, that's great. They probably had the most prolific experience out of anybody in the crowd, possibly even the person performing the act, directing. view the ritual?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was definitely a very, it could be a challenging role, especially, you know, if you're, usually we wouldn't pick someone who wasn't okay with with nudity. That'd be something we'd talk about beforehand, but I think it's different once you actually get up there. So after that would be set, we have the human altar. Then we would do a sacrifice. And this is often the part that was quite challenging for the audience, because we would have someone, a lot of times we would do a sacrifice of blood. So we had one person who they were very comfortable doing things like bloodletting themselves. So they would take like sterile instruments and bloodlet, you sometimes kind of rubbing it all over themselves or draining it into a goblet, something like that. Or they would do other forms of, you might consider endurance art, performance art, body art.
Once it's in the goblet, there's so many things you can do with it from then on. It's collected. You could paint, you could drink it, you could pour it on yourself.
We've done all those things, yeah. We did all of those. In this one, the specific ritual that I'm thinking about, we did all that, and then we basically lead to sort of the climax of it. And so what I did was I got into a little pool, and then they poured 10 gallons of cow's blood over me. And so they pour it all over me, and you think you're ready. You think you know what that's like. It was all over me. The smell was so intense. It was going up my nose. Like, it was just, and it's like they had like multiple buckets of it, and and it's just coming over me. And like, at one point I tried to lean my head down so I could maybe have like a space for air. And it's just like waterfall of blood coming over. And I miscalculated, lifted my head up, and it was just like straight up my nose. And I would smell blood in my nose for weeks after that.
Oh boy.
So as you can imagine, the performances got quite messy, but also quite intense, even for the audience. You know, even people who were familiar with more, so I guess you could say, boundary pushing performance art, a lot of them said, like, you know, I've never seen something like that before. One person said, in my parents' worst nightmare, I'm doing this right now.
Yeah, I admire the ambition of it. Where would you get this cow's blood from?
You can get it from a butcher. We had to call like 4 or 5 different butchers before we found someone who would sell it to us.
Is it expensive?
No, it's cheap. People use it to make like, so there's certain ethnic dishes that people use it to make, use the blood to make food. So if you find someone who has some because they sell it for food, you can buy it from them.
Great. Out of all of the different rituals you've tried, you've participated in, whether it was one of yours or somebody else's, whether it was satanic or not, which one did you feel you really felt something from? You can still recall there's one specific rare feeling that maybe you would never feel it in any other circumstance.
Yeah, so actually 5 years ago at the Beat-In, which, you know, is a BDSM event, I actually, the group that I was doing the other performances with had just disbanded, and I was looking to do solo ritual performance art. And so I had put something out there, and I was invited to perform at the Beat-In. And I did a performance with sterile, single-use scalpels, did a sort of like interpretive body movement where I cut myself all over my body to the point of bleeding. And I did it on top of this sort of like mat and was sort of just doing these interpretive body movements with harsh noise playing in the background. I had a piece by Pharmacon playing. And there were so many people there. It was such a large event. It was actually larger than anything I'd done before. And
what, like 200 people, would you say?
It was definitely like at least 150 people. It was a way more than I had thought there were going to be. I wasn't familiar with the event, so I didn't know how large it was going to be.
Yeah, it's a fairly large venue.
Yeah, and that was at the old venue, so that one was really, and it was quite spacious. unlike other performances I had done, I really felt that everyone was watching. I felt that everyone was locked in. And at one point, I miscalculated slightly and cut myself a little too deep. I have a pretty severe scar from it still. And I was just bleeding all over the place. But I didn't stop the performance. It was getting absolutely everywhere. And I could feel that there was such a tension of everyone watching me, and everyone was so silent. I could feel they were taking what I was doing quite seriously. And then once it ended, there was just such an uproaring applause. I could tell that even if people were, it wasn't just that they were shocked. They felt something beyond shock. They felt an intensity and a purposeful sincerity to it. And that was definitely the most impactful performance I ever did.
Yeah, I can imagine how rewarding that is. I DJ sometimes, and even then, when you have the whole crowd almost brainwashed by every song you play, they move to it differently, they might cheer. It's a great feeling, but I couldn't compare it to something where people were actively watching and letting you do something where you might bleed out and make serious errors. They really care about you. They really care for your health. But they're also in belief that you know what you're doing, so they trust you at the same time. It makes me think of Fire Throws a little bit, but this is still far more visceral. Did your cult have any guiding law behind it, some principles? Did it fall back on any literature, or was it all written from the bottom up, from you and your team?
Yeah, so good question. So our coven we were kind of building things from the bottom up, and that was part of the project, because the sad fact is that because Satanism is so new, it really, really became a systematized religious philosophy of sorts in the 1960s. There were sort of traces of it before, but it was not systematized at all. It hasn't had a lot of time to sort of marinate. And so there isn't a lot of writing on it. Any writing that you'll see on it is going to be sort of academic and historical, doing an overview of the development of Satanism. But other than some of Anton LaVey's writings, especially at the time, there just wasn't really anything out there. You had Satanists doing things in a sort of grassroots way, but you didn't really have a lot written down. And so that's why I started writing my thoughts about it down. I started by writing these essays where I was sort of elucidating the direction that I thought Satanism should go in, values that I thought were important, that sort of thing, ideas present in Christianity and even other forms of Satanism that I was not so fond of, and the reasons why. But I think the one thing that I really fell back on, at least in the beginning, was that friendship is really important, that connections are really important. I felt that was a value that was important to me and important to the people in our coven, that, this is a very personal thing, to have a close spiritual community with people. It's going to require you to be vulnerable. Maybe you want to be vulnerable. A lot of people have a lot of religious trauma, and they're trying to unpack that. And because of the sort of purposefully antagonistic nature of Satanism, especially towards Christianity, people are using Satanism to undo these painful knots that Christianity has instilled in them. And it's going to require them to be vulnerable in front of people. And so if you're going to do that, you need friends. And so friendship was really, I think, the most important value that we had in our coven.
And a coven, correct me if I'm wrong, is that female only?
No. So a coven is really just a group of, spiritual practitioners. You sometimes hear the word coven used in other sort of New Age religions or new religious movements like Wicca or pagan Reconstruction, groups. A lot of times it's just preferred by sort of practitioners of the occult. I think it definitely gives a different impression than the word church, right?
Sure, yeah, totally. I was trying to think of a different word other than coven that you might use, but every time I think of church, I think specifically like Christianity. Do you have a documentation of all these ideas that you definitely feel are important still, that aren't useless, that aren't toxic, aren't damaging? Earlier you mentioned you wrote a book recently and published it.
Yeah, so back in 2021, I believe, I published a text about Satanism. It's a nonfiction text about Satanism called Satanism in Theory and Practice. And it was released on through a European publisher. It was a small print, so there were only, I don't know, I think a couple hundred copies made. It was it had all of my ideas in it. It had a brief history of Satanism. It had some of the main satanic branches, and it's sort of just an overview for people who were interested in actually having a compiled set of information instead of having to be like, okay, I got to look through 6-7 different books to get an accurate sense of this. I was pretty lucky in that I got picked up by a publisher pretty quickly. I'd gotten maybe like 3 rejections in, which I can tell you is a lot less than a lot of people end up facing. And the person I had sent it to said, well, I don't have room on my docket this year to publish something like this. However, I know someone who I think is going to be interested in something like this. So I was picked up by Fall of Man Publishers, which is a European-based book publisher. And I sent my proposal over, and the publisher responded back, and he asked me, which I thought was really interesting. He said, "Are you serious about this? Because a lot of Satanists that I talk to treat it like a joke. And so I want to know, are you actually serious about this?" And I have to say, I really appreciated that question because I agree with him. I think, even people who really enjoy Satanism and look to be more involved with it, there's almost this like insecure sort of playfulness. Like, when you have an interest in something, but you're afraid people are going to make fun of you. So you're like, just joking. There's a lot of that in Satanism. And, I appreciated that he was looking for something more sincere. And of course, my answer was yes, I'm very serious about this. And I had a great publication experience. He got me a beautiful designer for my book. It has absolutely beautiful illustrations inside, a beautiful design on the leather cover. I also have a hardcover edition. It was a small print. That's pretty common with small publishers, as it's quite expensive to publish. And they all sold out. My book, Satanism in Theory and Practice, is now a collector's item. If you look it up online, you will find it for sale on American sites like eBay, but you'll also find on European resale sites. I found one on eBay that was being sold for $600. So I would consider that a success. I think the fact that people are that interested in the text, it makes me proud. Even though looking back on it, I definitely consider it an early work, and I would love to go back and revise some things that I definitely think I could improve on.
What do you have in mind for your next steps? What are you working on at the moment? Is there anything specific?
So I would like to do a second edition, right? Do revisions. I acknowledge places where I had shortcomings. I also add things that I've learned, maybe new sources. Fortunately, there has been a lot more research done on Satanism from an academic standpoint since I wrote that. And so there's a lot I would like to draw from. Beyond that, even though, I feel like I want to get back to doing performance again. I want to get back to doing rituals again. I have ideas.
Do you have one in particular, like, ready to go in your head, like is in the docket, you just need the opportunity in place for, or anything like that?
Yeah, so I do have a couple ideas. I don't know if I should share them quite yet, but I have a lot of ideas for performances. As for ideas like sort of like theoretical, I definitely would like to write a book specifically on satanic feminism. I think writing a book about all the intersection of Satanism and gender and women, all those other ideas that come bundled into it. I think it's natural for Satanism. There's actually a really good essay called, I believe it's called The Devil is Red, and it's about the conceptual and symbolic connection between Satanism and Marxism and the way that it has been used throughout Europe specifically. The author is specifically a historian of Satanism.
I wonder if that's because regularly accepted organized religion, it's less about looking at each other and inside, it's more looking to one great perfect deity that looks after all of us, whilst maybe Satanism is more about looking towards each other, looking inside yourself for your own strength. I remember earlier you were mentioning an important part of the coven is that friendship, which is a repeating kind of mantra within Marxist works. With feminism, I think women really have to stick together. That's something I've always seen. Give each other the benefit of the doubt before anybody else. There's, that sense of camaraderie, which is very strong.
I definitely think women can get at each other, and I think there's a lot of division with women. To your point, though, I think because a lot of the values of dominant religion, especially in the West, involves the obedience to a male figure. And then, especially in like evangelical circles where, you have the sort of ontological umbrella of obedience where you have like God, then you have like the husband, then you have the wife and the children. I think Satanism naturally seeks to disrupt that. I think it goes, well, that's not right. And so depending on how, what other sort of like ideological cards the Satanist brings to the table, it could seek to reorganize that in different ways. Many Satanists are anarchists. I think anarchism lends itself very naturally to Satanism. I also think that various forms of Marxism lends itself very easily to Satanism. The disruption of authority, absolutely. Well, that's all the satanic sort of literature, right? You've got Paradise Lost, Satan overthrowing God, that could easily be seen as a metaphor for the overthrowing of whatever power structure there is. You also have, even just within the Bible, the stories of like Eve and the serpent or lizard or what have you. Satan as a benevolent, could be male, not necessarily, but could be male assistant to female liberation. Like, Satan showing Eve, here, take this and I will show you that you are not equal in this arrangement, that you have gotten the short end of the stick here. Now, there are some problems you could raise with like, well, that's still a man, like liberating, women from male supremacy. Satan could easily be interpreted as like a male purposefully relinquishing his power and saying, yes, by making women and other gender minorities equal in this arrangement, I must give something up. I have to give up the ease of my life that comes with having, built-in subservience in this way. I have to give up securities in certain ways. I also will have to give up a sort of innate sense of fraternity with other men, possibly. We must relinquish in order to have equality for everybody. There's other ways you could interpret it too. I mean, we could go up and down all day and take these biblical stories, which historically have been used to establish these hierarchies, and we could just use our imagination and go, actually, it's the other way around. The symbolism is quite rich. But on that note, part of my writing project was to establish Satanism's own philosophy. So instead of just saying, here's all this stuff about Christianity, we don't like it, this is why it's bad, that's Satanism. Satanism is all the stuff that we don't like about Christianity. We can definitely do that. I definitely love being a hater, but that doesn't make a philosophy in and of itself. It has to stand for something. It has to exist independently of its antagonism to other things. And so that was part of my writing project, was not just here are the issues that I have with Christianity or these philosophies, but this is what Satanism brings to the table of its own accord. If none of these other things existed, Satanism would still have these things. That friendship is very important. In fact, that friendship is the most vital connection that we have.
Mm-hmm. You don't have any vulnerabilities if you have enough friends that can fill those holes, and like the same for them, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've got everything you need.
Not being bound by the usual structures of blood, like family blood, like your family can be chosen. It doesn't have to be.
And family, and even like sort of these sort of concepts of like romance, even like marriage. You know, you have to. The only real loves you'll have are your parents and your spouse, but that friendly love can exist in many different forms and pervasively throughout all of your connections. Also, that you, while bound by the limitations of your life in the way that everybody is, you have agency and power within these limitations. Like a bonsai tree, you could imagine, we grow in spite of, or maybe even because of, the great limitations placed upon us. And that is the importance of the will in Satanism, I think. And that was something I was attempting to sort of establish. So there was a bunch of different values that I was attempting to sort of bring to the table. But like I said, if I had the opportunity, I would definitely go back and maybe polish some things off, fix some things. And I think it's good. I think you should. I think you should look back at your mistakes and maybe do a brief little cringe and then go, okay, I'll fix it. I'll work it out on the remix, I guess.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you got to finish up you got to deliver a piece of art eventually. Nothing will ever be perfect. Mm-hmm. However, there's the argument of, are you even getting any satisfaction out of it until it's perfect enough? You're only doing it because you want to. So releasing it because it's not perfect enough isn't what you want to do. It's a dilemma.
I had to force myself to release it. I had to be like, I need to do this. I felt a compulsion. I was like, because if I don't make myself do it, it's not going to happen. I have to deal with the fact that I'm like, every time I would send it to a publisher, I'd be like nauseous. I'd be like, ugh. I will say, everyone was very nice. Everyone was very nice. Even the people who rejected me, they were very sweet. And like I said, one of my rejections sent me to my publisher. So my word to anyone who is writing a book of any kind, fiction, nonfiction, whatever, and you are nervous about sending it to a publisher, do it, because they may send you to someone who wants to publish your book, even if they say no. It is an opportunity. I know that sounds like dorky corporate speak, but it is so true. If you send your work to a publisher and they say that's just not something we're interested in right now, there's a possibility that they may go, but, I do know a publishing company who's looking for just this.
Out of all the people that joined the coven, people come for different reasons. Some perhaps for the right reasons. I think everybody comes from the right reasons at the beginning, but then at some point you've just got to be honest and be like, no, this is resulting in a lot of pain for others, a lot of negativity, and that's when you finally decide, okay, these are wrong reasons.
I think some people come to any sort of intimate group, and there are some people who come to be wicked and to do harm to others. And obviously, I don't want to approach all relationships with the assumption that this person is potentially wicked, but that is the reality. And so you do need to have, I think, emotional and intellectual safeguards, especially with something as intimate and vulnerable as a spiritual group like that. But this really could go for anything where people are being very vulnerable. I'm even thinking like a therapy group or something like that. You know, are most people...
Where you have to trust each other, you know?
And you have to trust yourself. Your intuition at times will tell you something's not right about this. The way this person is acting, there's something about the way that they're approaching me or others or their behavior that it's not working out. It's causing harm. It's doing whatever, but, and then you have to take action. I think that's one place where I have really struggled in the past is, someone is making a problem and it actually is quite serious, but it's hard, right? To be like, especially when it's like, it's a satanic coven. We're all fucking rejects, right? Like we're all the island of misfit toys. You don't want to further reject somebody, but you also need to be real. There are malicious people out there. Fortunately, I don't think that's the majority of people, but you do need to sort of like keep an eye out for that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's tough. Finding real enough with somebody where no excuse is going to, no excuse they could come up with, because some of the wickedest people, they're the best at making excuses. They're the best at making you feel bad for them. Mm-hmm. Better than the people who are true of heart. So for Coven, it no longer exists in the way that you're a part of it or without not being a part of it.
It doesn't exist at all. It's a defunct organization.
Was it quite a sudden stop or was it gradual?
Sadly, I cannot really talk about it for my own safety.
I respect that. Mm-hmm. Sure.
Is there anything you miss from it?
Yes, I miss doing ritual performances. I miss doing freaky shit like covering myself in blood or sticking needles through someone. I know you can do that in sort of a secular extreme body art sort of thing. There are several groups around Detroit who do that kind of thing. It's not really the same when there isn't the sort of unifying theme of Satanism.
What was the biggest ritual you could do as part of the community? Because that's one of the biggest strengths about having a community. You're not just doing it with one partner, one other, I don't want to compare you to a team of dancers, but it is.
No, it is. It's like a performance art troupe. It's similar, yeah. It's really similar to that. In fact, I used to describe it that way to people when I didn't want to give the background about Satanism. I'd be like, oh, I'm part of a performance art troupe.
Sure. Would you say it's more of it's like performance art with an added layer of spirituality?
Yeah, or you could even invert that and say it's spirituality through performance art.
Anything else that comes to mind? Anything else you think is important for people thinking of going the same direction that they should know? Or you just encourage them to go for it and keep their eyes peeled?
I would say if you're under the impression that there aren't people like you out there, you're mistaken. There are a lot of them, and they are everywhere. You just have to make yourself known.
Okay. Thank you, nice.
Mm-hmm.
You have a great night.
Yeah, thank you.